And welcome back to Reunited States, the podcast where we bring civil discourse back into our national dialogue. From Manchester, New Hampshire, my name is Jesse Saywell.
And from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Eric.
Alright, so we've got a lot of news to catch you up on here. There's been a lot going on, and if you feel overwhelmed by the amount of things going on at the start of the Trump administration, well, that is by design. They are certainly trying to flood you with as much information so as many things can slip by you as possible. They're trying to send distractions out. We want to make sure we highlight the most important things that you need to know about what's going on in your government. We'll start out with some lightning news here. I'll get started. So Pete Hegseth, former Fox News commentator, Pete Hegseth was confirmed as Defense Secretary in a narrow vote, with Vice President J.D. Vance casting the tie-breaking vote after three GOP senators, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, and Mitch McConnell, former Senate leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, voted against his nomination along with all 47 Democrats. It is only the second time in history that a vice president has had to cast a tie-breaking vote, the first being, you might remember, Betsy DeVos for Education Secretary in the first Trump administration back in 2017. Wow, that feels like a long time ago.
President Trump fires 17 inspectors general across a variety of government agencies. Now, these are watchdog positions. Critics claim that the law states that these individuals can only be fired with written cause provided to Congress and 30 days notice. But when has that ever stopped Trump before?
Yep. Certainly didn't stop him here. You know, Jon Stewart made a good point the other day. I mean, is this really what we're worried about? Yes, I'm worried about him doing this. But the 30-day thing is our only argument about this. If you give presidents the right to be a king, they're going to act like a king, and that's, a flaw in the system right there, that he can just fire these people.
He wants no oversight. That's the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely.
He wants zero oversight. That's the goal.
Yeah, it's terrible. Donald Trump has issued a buyout offer to almost all federal employees. The buyout would allow them to continue to be paid through September of this year, but they would not be expected to continue working in their current capacities, not expected to continue working in person, or at all in many circumstances. So federal employees have until February 6th to accept this offer. This is the purge that we're talking about. This feels very similar to Elon Musk when he took over Twitter, now known as X. I'm sure that he was the architect behind this, but the goal being get as many people out of the government as possible who Trump believes are liberals.
Right. The only reason it's written the way it is to get it through the unions, and of course to avoid lawsuits. This is very, very typical private industry behavior, but it should be something that we should be concerned about. And we'll talk about this in a different episode when you talk about the government and the way it works. But this is going to have severe impacts if the people that are expected to accept it per Trump's plan. The White House Office of Management and Budget issued a now rescinded memo that froze federal grants and loans and created widespread confusion. A federal judge had previously blocked part of the freeze temporarily. These grants included money for community health centers, Meals on Wheels that provided meals for senior citizens in need, and posed threats to Medicaid funding.
Yeah, this pretty much sent everyone into chaos. It kind of came out of nowhere. Even GOP representatives and senators came out and voiced concerns, called the White House saying, why were we not given any notification about this?
But also kind of goes to your point of semi-smokescreen, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, yeah, clearly this is going to get, not clearly, but it was blocked. This really does feel like just a big old, loud noise, a distraction noise.
Yeah, a loud noise that created a lot of very real uncertainty for a lot of people. I mean, community health centers were closing their doors. They weren't sure if they were going to be able to continue. And this is just the erratic behavior that exists with a ruling party right now that is intent on burning everything to the ground. They're not really concerned with building anything. their interest is burning things to the ground. Off of that note, President Trump signed an executive order that bans transgender troops from serving in the military. There are roughly 15,000 transgender troops serving in the military at this time. It's quite a large number of people to be turning away who have volunteered to serve their country. The justification for it is, again, just... this is just fear-mongering.
Especially considering that they're moving forward with more funding for the military and for registration of the military. They are pushing further registration at the same time that they are trying to get rid of the people that they don't want in the military. It's so clear that it's just about that. It's about the communities that they don't want being in their in-group. It's disgusting. It's sad.
Yep.
Trump's press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, claimed in her first press conference that 50 million U.S. taxpayer dollars were being spent on provided condoms to the people of Gaza. A Guardian report investigated this claim and discovered that none of the over 60 million in contraceptive and condom supplies funded by the U.S. government went to Gaza. In fact, not a single penny has been spent on condoms throughout any part of the Middle East.
Yeah, no, just totally baseless claim about condoms, but, it sure sounds good. Oh, why are we sending condoms to the people of Gaza?
Well, again, it's just an excuse to get rid of federal funding, right? It's an excuse to get rid of funding, which is what he wants to do.
Yes, and it's just fake. That was totally made up. As of this recording, the Senate is engaging in confirmation hearings for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for the position of Health and Human Services Director. Kennedy, of course, as we have talked about on this program, is known for vaccine skepticism, unusual behavior, to say the least, and fierce criticism of the FDA and health practices in the United States. His niece, Caroline Kennedy, sweet Caroline Kennedy. Caroline Kennedy has put out a scathing statement referring to him as a quote-unquote predator prior to his hearing. We'll see how this happens. I have a good friend of mine who he and I have been arguing and debating now for well over a week. He thinks that Kennedy's going to get 70 votes in the Senate to confirm. In watching that today, I'm not sure where he sees 17 Democratic senators that are going to vote for Kennedy, much less all 53 Republicans, for that matter, who are very skeptical on his previous support for abortion, that he now just simply says, I believe that every abortion is a tragedy. That's all he says today. So, yeah.
Now, is that him saying it, or is it the brainworm?
It could be the brainworm, I think that the brainworm was just related to the bear in Central Park. That's, that's where he got it.
It controls him, man. It's like the alien in Men in Black. It just controls his body.
Honestly, stranger things have happened.
President Trump has said he will order the construction of a mass detention camp in Guantanamo Bay for migrants awaiting deportation.
Guantanamo Bay. I mean, this is the thing. That is an area that has been reserved for holding terrorists without trial. This is just bizarre behavior. We didn't even mention that Trump and Colombia almost got into a trade war because Colombia refused to accept U.S. military planes that were carrying undocumented migrants that had been deported back to Colombia. That we didn't even touch on here in Lightning News, so I figure I should also share that with you. That kind of standstill ended with Colombia's president backing down and sending his own plane up to get the migrants, but we haven't seen the last of this. That's Colombia, having just been there, I can assure you it is one of, if not our strongest ally in South America, and as such, very strange again to be picking fights on these fronts, but it's not the last time that this is going to happen. So the Justice Department fired all members who worked on the investigations into President Trump, specifically into January 6th and issues relating to that, but also into the Georgia case. All of those people have been fired. The acting attorney general said he believed that these individuals would not, quote-unquote, support the president's agenda, end quote. Just a reminder to everyone that the Justice Department is not supposed to have an agenda. That is the point of the Justice Department, is it is supposed to be a separate entity, not under the control of the President of the United States. That is how it has always been, but apparently not under this administration. Between revoking security clearances for his political enemies, for people like Anthony Fauci, people like former General Milley, people like John Bolton, I mean, these were Republicans that served under him, and he's revoking their now security teams, even though they're being threatened at times by assassination attempts from foreign agencies. All of this.
Lastly, President Trump signs into law the Lake and Riley Act, making it possible to deport undocumented immigrants immediately if they are accused of certain crimes. Critics say this violates due process, which, of course, it does, amongst other things.
Yeah, I mean, this is crazy because it's not even that they're deporting undocumented immigrants immediately who have been charged with crimes. This is just like accusations. They don't even have to be formally charged for this. Look, I am fully in support of deporting violent criminals and any undocumented person from any country anywhere who violates the law in significant capacities. The current administration is now saying, we were talking about criminals. Well, they're all criminals because they've all broken the law. And that's the position now, is that they've all broken the law by coming into the country in the first place. They're all criminals.
This is what J.D. Vance said on Monday on Face the Nation. This is exactly what he said. We're doing this because we're protecting you from like the 0.00001% of undocumented immigrants that have committed some sort of heinous act, some sort of crazy crime. Again, less than 1%, which they will never say that. They'll say, oh, look, one person. Yeah. Anyway, we're going to get into immigration.
Yeah, let's give us some information, some background history on immigration, Tyler, because this is obviously a critical issue in America, and it's, a big reason, whether we like it or not. It is a huge reason as to why the current president, President Trump, was elected back to the White House in November.
Yeah, and I'll start with saying this. It shouldn't be a surprise, and I'll get into why. But before that, I wrote this section wanting to talk in depth about immigration in the United States and what this means for the history of immigrants in the United States right now. And I want to do this to really dedicate it to my grandfather, Umberto, who passed away last week. He came to this country from Bolivia in the 50s with his wife, a son, and really pennies to his name. I mean, he spent all of his money. He didn't have nothing in Bolivia. They lived well, but they spent everything to come here. He worked blue collar in an airplane factory in Weber for 30 plus years, commuting from Hollywood all the way to Palmdale every day, carving out the life he wanted, living the American dream. He is one of those success stories. And he's not the only one. There are thousands of people, millions of people that have been able to do that because of the opportunity that this country gave them. But the thing of the matter is, everyone talks about how America is the country that gives us all this opportunity, right, to migrants. But it's never been easy. It's never been easy. In fact, it's always been an uphill climb to even get into this country and to stay into this country. I feel with everything going on and the uncertainty of millions of undocumented and temporary citizens and legitimate citizens, with everything that they face in the coming months and years, I feel I owe it to him to talk about this crisis. I owe it to his memory, and I want to hopefully bring some historical background and to this very real struggle. It's no surprise that one of the biggest talking points in the media and in political circles has been Trump's unprecedented attack on Hispanic immigrants in this country. From implementing stricter vetting for visa applicants, expediting the removal of undocumented immigrants, denying federal funding to sanctuary jurisdictions, suspending the U.S. refugee admissions program, rescinding restrictions on immigrations and customs enforcement to allow them to make arrests in sensitive areas, and of course attempting to end birthright citizenship. And while it can be exhausting to talk about what's happening now and if it's possible and what to do about it, and believe me, I'll touch on what to do about it a bit later, I think it's also important to see how this reflects American history. Because I hear from a lot of different sources, a lot of people, how all of a sudden America is turning into this country that hates immigrants and wants to reprioritize white American liberties or whatever, with things like the DEI rollbacks in conjunction with the Trump administration's increasingly far-right immigration policy. And that's all true. In a future episode, I'd love to go into depth about the DEI issue and, what that means for members of minority groups. But the issue I have with this generalization that this is somehow new, the issue I have with this sentiment really is that it centralizes the source of anti-migrant policy and hate to this one guy, Donald Trump. And yes, he very much is responsible for the current iteration of anti-migrant sentiment in our country. His statements about the migrant caravans, his infamous, "They're sending the West, they're rapists, they're murderers," the border wall, and of course his 2024 campaign promises, which he is now actively working to fulfill, have all contributed to building the current state of immigrant opinion across the country. And yes, we should absolutely blame him, shame him, and chastise him for being a paragon of hate and division. But this didn't start with Trump. And it certainly is not going to end with Trump. America, for nearly as long as it's been around at this point, has struggled with the acceptance of foreign non-Anglo-Saxon white or European immigrants on its soil. We couldn't even stand to live with the indigenous people who were already here when we came. People would say America is a proud country of immigrants, that immigrants founded this country, immigrants built this country, immigrants made this country great. That's all true. In 1903, the famous sonnet, "The New Colossus," was placed on the base of the Statue of Liberty, which at the time had been dedicated not 17 years earlier. It reads, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." These words were, and still are, widely seen as the motto of the USA. The place you can come and fulfill the American dream. Yet the real story of America's struggle to accept immigrants from all places had already been in full force before the Statue of Liberty was even erected. Now, of course, Lady Liberty was not created with the intention of being a symbol of immigration, but it later became synonymous with it. And I think most anyone nowadays would agree that it is. But let's rewind time for a second. Because when you look at history, the struggle has always been in that prioritization of white immigrants. We saw the first naturalization law in 1790, which limited naturalization to white persons of good character, immigrants. Almost 100 years later, 1870, the new Naturalization Act was revised to, thankfully, include African Americans. That was President Grant. But here's where it gets interesting. Because something else happened in the 1870s. 123,000 Chinese individuals immigrating to the United States over the course of the decade. An increase from the 105,000 that emigrated there between 1850 and 1870. This pushed Congress to pass the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, limiting Chinese immigration into the U.S. almost completely. This act was not repealed until 1943, post World War II. So why did this happen? Well, the answer might sound scarily similar to what we hear now. Jobs. The Chinese were taking railroad jobs. Jobs during the gold rush in California. This is what led to a phenomenon known as the Yellow Terror that was taking hold in the United States. People afraid of the Chinese and other Asian immigrants coming and taking jobs, reforming cultures, things like that. During this period of time, we also saw the Johnson-Reed Act, 1924, which allowed a limited number of immigrants into the U.S. through a national origins quota. The quota at the time was 2% of the total number of people of each nationality in the U.S. as of the 1890 census, keeping minorities a minority and majorities a majority, ensuring this. This, of course, excluded not just the Chinese, per the Chinese Exclusion Act, but also anyone born in the geographically defined Asiatic Barred Zone, which includes virtually all Asian countries, except for Japan, which signed a deal allowing limited migration of Japanese immigrants to the United States, and the Philippines, which was at the time a U.S. colony. And if you're curious, that was President Coolidge. So let's move on to 1932. Immigration is shut down almost entirely during the Great Depression, along with the deportation of anywhere between 500,000 to 2 million Mexican Americans, including citizens. Why? Because they were widely scapegoated for the overall economic downturn of the Great Depression. Blamed, then deported. American citizens targeted through their proximity to the border, physical distinctiveness, and easily identifiable communities. Their barrios. That was President Hoover. More immigration quotas came in the McCarran-Walter Act of 1952. Similar to before, quotas made in proportion to national origins of the population as of 1920. Interestingly, this was vetoed by President Truman, but then overridden by Congress. That was later abolished in 1965. We go on to the 1990s, Immigration Act of 1990, which was pretty revolutionary at the time, increases the immigration limit to 700,000, a number we kept for a long time, and increased visas by 40%. That was George H.W. Bush. But not 6 years later, illegal immigration becomes an issue per the government. We see the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act, which vastly increased the categories of criminal activities for which immigrants, including those with green cards, can be deported for. We're not just talking murder, crazy things like that. We're talking even most minor of crimes. This led to over 2 million deportations since 1996. That was Bill Clinton. But then we have the DREAM Act, 2001. At least 2001 at the time it was introduced first. Possibly one of the greatest pro-migrant legislation we've seen in our history, certainly in my lifetime. It aimed to naturalize undocumented immigrants who met certain requirements. This was a really big deal, and a lot of people probably know this one more than everything else. It was debated for years, unsuccessfully, written and rewritten, until Obama came around, said, fuck it, and created DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and pushed at least the core principles of the DREAM Act forward. Now, and that's how we have our dreamers. If you live in a big city near the Mexican border, or even beyond, there is a high chance that you know a dreamer, or know someone who does. It created a life previously thought impossible for thousands upon thousands of immigrants in this country. Now listen, if there's anything to take away from a little history speech, It's this. It's that history repeats itself. And we are on the brink of it repeating itself again. The Trump administration has armed itself with everything it needs to enact his agenda. Yeah, birthright citizenship stunt, that might not come to pass. Yeah, it was insane. Absolutely. Could have been a smokescreen. Yeah, totally. But that might not stop him from being able to deport thousands upon millions of upstanding Latin American immigrants. Yes, many, if not most of those, may be undocumented. Many could be green card holders with temporary status. And yeah, some might even be citizens. We don't really know what the scope of that's going to be. But if you think I'm crazy about this, anticipating all this, I don't think so. Because in the past month alone, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, has been spotted all over Los Angeles. People have seen them everywhere in unprecedented numbers. They're going door to door. They're being seen in unmarked vans, waiting for the right person to cross their path, waiting for the opportunity to approach some innocent passersby that has the right shade of brown, asking them for their papers. These orders, these actions are already affecting families and communities across the country. That's why this is so important to talk about. So, what can we do about it? What should we do about it? I'll tell you. The answer is not anger. The answer is not hate. The answer is certainly not violence. The answer is not to flee the country, or anything of that matter. No. The answer is to stay. Stay where you are. Don't answer the door. You don't have to. Don't give them information. You don't have to. Ask for a warrant. Don't fold to that pressure. No. Stay where you are. Because this is as much your country as it is mine, or Jesse's, or anybody else's. You came here for a reason. Stay here for that reason. They want us to yell and run and hide and fight. They want a reason to say immigrants are dangerous. Immigrants need to go. Do not give them that reason. Prove to them that you are better than who they want you to be, who they desperately want you to be for the cameras. And for those of us privileged to have citizenship, it's our job to speak for them. No, you don't have to create signs and protest in DC, though you certainly can if you feel obligated to. No, it's much easier than that. Just talk to people. Talk to people. We say it all the time on this podcast. Talk to your neighbor. Talk to your neighbor's neighbor. Try and change a single mind, because maybe that person can change another mind. That is how we can create the lasting change we desperately need, without giving them the fuel that they need to further their own agenda. And that is how we can hopefully break the repetition of history. I'll leave you with a fun fact I actually didn't know until I researched this. Ken Cuccinelli, then acting director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services during Trump's first term in, I believe, 2019, tried to change the language on the new Colossus to the following. I quote, "Give me your tired and your poor who can stand on their own 2 feet and who will not become a public charge," end quote. He then doubles down on this later, suggesting that the term huddled masses be specifically European. Dude, come on now. Disgusting. But you know what? Reflective of the struggle that America has had with non-white immigration since near its inception. That's all I got for you.
Yeah, remarkably well said. First thing I'll say is, just what a lovely and moving tribute to your grandfather, and obviously so sorry for your loss, my friend. But what a really moving, kind of tribute to him, and also just a really remarkably well-structured kind of history and an argument to be made about immigration in this country, and really a reminder to all of us why immigration is the backbone of America, and why it has been for so long, and why it continues to be. And so, again, that doesn't mean that we're for open borders, entirely open borders, and anyone who wants to come here in any situation can. But what it does mean is we have to be true to the foundings of the nation in terms of welcoming people into this country and making the American dream a reality for people who come here. And the cruelness that is being exhibited right now is really, really frustrating. And I mean, frustrating. It's disheartening. It's demoralizing. You mentioned kind of the ICE situation. ICE now, the policy of the U.S. government is that if ICE goes in to find someone on a warrant who is undocumented, they can search the remainder of the house for other people who live in said home who are undocumented, and that being in the house with someone who is undocumented is cause for them to search you and ask for your papers. Again, this is a major shift in priorities, and it really does put families at risk. It means that potentially, say you have someone that they're, looking for, this, your father is undocumented. It could potentially be your father, your mother, your grandmother, your aunt, a whole family of people. And there's nothing built in there for, okay, how do we take care of young children who potentially are citizens of this country in the aftermath of this? There's, of course,
The reality is they don't care.
They don't care. No.
That's the thing. The children is what allowed us to have stuff like DACA, have stuff like the Dreamers. Like, that was all about the kids. When Obama created that program, like, that was meant for the children to have an opportunity in this country. I know so many of them. Like, that was for the kids. And eliminating it, everything relating to the lifting of restrictions on ICE, it's all like, again, the kids are always going to be the ones that are going to be affected first and most. Most of them don't know their home country. They've probably never even been there. And they're forced to live there with or without their families in places that, frankly, are dangerous.
Yeah.
Dangerous places. People don't come here because their home is, like, awesome and amazing.
Yeah.
They're fleeing something. It's the places there are unfortunately ripe with crime and danger of various types. And we're sending kids to that?
And it's a lack of humanity. There is a lack of seeing immigrants to this country, particularly non-white immigrants to this country, as human beings. And a reminder needs to we need to constantly be reminding ourselves that these are not just numbers. Like, when you say, border crossings, the 2 million people and 4 million, undocumented people crossed the border last year. Like, think about the number of stories of those people who have struggled and suffered and risked everything to come here. I'm not saying that means that we can let every single person into the country. That's not what I personally am arguing for. What I am saying is that we have to treat people like human beings. And the Trump administration is not just doing stricter border policies. They are being cruel in the way that they are applying these laws in order to deport people who are largely black and brown people in this country. And they're targeting the most vulnerable people in our society, and they're doing it in a way that has no thought whatsoever to the ramifications of that on other human beings that may be dependent upon these people that are being deported.
Businesses that are dependent on it.
Of course.
Entire communities, workforces that are dependent on it.
It's shameful, and it is, again, when I talked last week about the smoke screens. These are the things that we need to be mindful of. Yes, I get it. The executive order to end birthright citizenship. Sure, It's fucked up, but it is not going to happen. That is not going to happen. That is a smokescreen to get people talking about that while ICE is going door to door pulling people out of their homes.
Absolutely.
Don't take the bait. Stop freaking out about things, the gut reactions to his crazy tweets, any of this. It's so important. If you want to know how to fight back against this, don't fuel the kind of crazy overreaction Trump mania about every tiny little thing that he does or every absurd statement he makes. What are the policies? And the policies are disgusting. And those are the things we have to be putting our energy into fighting the next 4 years and beyond.
Folks at home, you heard it first from Jesse last week, before Pete Buttigieg said it.
Yes, before Pete Buttigieg, it's now all over. CNN, MSNBC, I turned on the radio today. I'm driving into work, and what do I hear? Well, there's smoke screens from the Trump White House, and it's everywhere. And I'm telling you, I've been saying this for months, and I've been saying it before he was even president. And this is why you listen to Reunited States, because you hear fantastic...
This is why Mayor Pete apparently listens to Reunited States.
Apparently he does. You hear fantastic...
Come on the show, Mayor Pete.
Come on, Mayor Pete. We would love to have you. But, you hear fantastic historical insights and impassioned pleas and personal stories from Tyler there, in addition to cutting through the bullshit of what we need to be freaking out about and what we don't. And on that note, I'd like to do things we can all agree on. And I'm going to start on this. Things we can all agree on. Stop eating your own. That's for Democrats here. Gather round, Democrats, because we need to talk about something that should be common sense, but apparently it's not. You are never going to get every Democrat to vote exactly how you want 100% of the time. And that is okay. I know. It's frustrating when someone in your party doesn't vote the way you would. You want a team that sticks together, that holds the line, that fights for the same values. But let's be real. If you're expecting a senator from Pennsylvania or a congressman from Arizona to vote the same way as a representative from Brooklyn or San Francisco, you need to take a breath and remember how elections work. Look at Ruben Gallego. The man was just elected to the Senate in Arizona, a purple border state. So when he breaks with the party on immigration policy, that's not some grand betrayal. That is him recognizing the realities of the state he's trying to represent. And maybe we need to be listening to someone like Ruben Gallego when he says that the Democratic Party is out of touch with most Latino voters. This is a guy who, going back, 3 years, was one of the first major voices to come out and say that the term Latinx is offensive and not used by most Latino voters. And I still hear that term used regularly, largely by white people, which is a really strange thing. But again, maybe we need to be listening to people like him. He recognizes the realities of the state that he's trying to represent. If he ran a campaign straight out of deep blue New York, he'd be handing that seat right back to Republicans on a silver platter. And then guess what? You get 0% of his votes instead of 80 or 90, and quite frankly, it'll be higher than 90. Ruben Gallego is a progressive. I met him when he was campaigning with Bernie Sanders. So I don't want to hear this like, he's another, Kirsten Sinema, Republican or in Democratic clothing. Let's take John Fetterman, who, by the way, is probably the most progressive person to ever wear basketball shorts on the Senate floor. Just have to say that. But he recently said that he doesn't want Trump's presidency to fail because when presidents fail, the country suffers. And suddenly, some people on the left lost their minds. Like he just switched parties. But just listen to him. He's not wrong. I don't like Trump. I cannot wait until he is out of not just office, but out of our public psyche. God, can we get back to a time period where we don't have to think about him every day and his horrid policies? But I don't want the presidency of Trump to fail. I'd love for him to figure out how to govern for all people. Rooting for total disaster just to say I told you so is not a winning strategy. If Trump tanks the country, that hurts everyone, not just the people who voted for him. This is made worse by partisan media personalities like Joy-Ann Reid on MSNBC, who, to be clear, I like. I think she's smart. I think she's right on the money with the vast majority of her opinions. But I was really disheartened to see her share a tweet about Senator Fetterman recently that said that he voted with the GOP to advance Pete Hegseth's nomination for defense secretary. And it had the caption, quote, "I feel like Pennsylvania voters got played on this one because John Fetterman definitely seems like a Republican," end quote. This is false. At best, this tweet is talking about a procedural move to not wait on the confirmation vote, which Fetterman did vote for, along with several other Democrats. But he voted against advancing Hegseth's nomination and against his confirmation. And yet a week later, Joy Reid has still not deleted this post and has continued her attacks on Fetterman. Why? Don't you want a Democratic senator in Pennsylvania? We just lost a critical Senate seat, the other Senate seat in Pennsylvania, because the Green Party doubled their vote total, largely over protest votes relating to Gaza. 70,000 people voted for the Green Party candidate for Senate. The Democrat lost by 16,000 votes. That's who you should be blaming on Pete Hegseth being confirmed, not John Fetterman. That one vote will be a deciding vote over and over again for the next 6 years, thanks to progressive purity tests. But no, some Democrats would rather eat their own than acknowledge political reality. You've got people treating anyone who deviates even slightly from the progressive playbook like a traitor, instead of realizing that different states have different politics. Let's take Joe Manchin, the recently retired former Democrat from West Virginia. I know, insert the groans from everyone. But contrary to what you might have been told, Joe Manchin voted with President Biden 88% of the time between 2020 and 2022. Slightly less than that, roughly 78% of the time after that. If you want a Democratic senator in West Virginia, you're not going to get Bernie Sanders in Carhartt overalls. You're going to get someone who sounds more like a moderate Republican. Why? Because West Virginia is not Vermont. The math is not that complicated. And before anyone mentions Kyrsten Sinema, I addressed her earlier, former senator of Arizona. Yes, I'm glad she's gone. And not because she was a moderate, but because no one knew what she stood for. Fetterman's stances and votes are pretty clear. Gallego's history is pretty clear as well. Stop looking at one vote out of 100 and getting angry. That's not how this system is supposed to work. Democrats need to stop chasing ideological purity and start focusing on winning elections. If you want a functioning government, you need a big tent, which means letting politicians represent the people who elected them, not just the loudest voices on X. So let's make a deal, okay? If someone votes with you 90% of the time, maybe don't throw them into the fire over the other 10%. If you demand 100% loyalty from every Democrat, you're not going to end up with a stronger party. You're going to end up with fewer Democrats. And if you'd rather lose elections than tolerate some political compromise, well, good luck with that. Republicans would love to send you a thank you card.
Whew, that was great. You know what? I got things we can all agree on. Here's the thing. My boss recently went to Sweden, right? And brought back me a little Swedish candy bar. Very nice of her. And I, in all of my fitness wisdom, I'm looking at the nutrition facts on the back, right? And one, I think it's super cool that calories are called energy, not calories. So it's like more representative of what calories actually are, not just like this boogeyman word in a lot of like diet culture in the United States. But instead, it's energy. That's literally exactly what it is. You need it to survive. But it also has, below the nutrition facts, it says like how much of this you should eat, right? So there's a whole thing on the candy bar that says, hey, you should only eat like half of this if you're gonna like munch on something today, because of like the nutrition or lack thereof within the candy bar. You know, I really respect that, because like, you know, not to say I was gonna eat the whole thing, but I was probably gonna eat like a bite. But seeing that kind of gave me pause to be like, oh, that makes sense. And really wish we had more of that in the United States. I recognize that there's a whole industry that like really, really doesn't want that because, you know, money and capitalism and all that nonsense. But I was particularly moved reading the backside of that candy bar. You know, there are some countries that actually care about health, believe it or not. Instead, what do we have? RFK Jr., I guess.
In fairness, RFK Jr. would agree with everything that you just said. In fairness to RFK Jr., he is very adamant about that aspect, and I think that's where a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans do agree with him on issues relating to health. You know, we can't keep putting out serving size, you know, on something, on a bag of chips, and it's like 12 serving sizes, you know, and it should be like 4 chips, you know, whatever. Like, we need to be much more clear about how much people should actually be eating in any one given sitting, certainly of processed foods. And so, yeah, like, in theory, that exists in the US. It's just convoluted as fuck and intentionally confusing. The things that are legal to put into our food here that are addictive as hell don't fly across the pond. They do not. And so, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, Sweden eats the 4th most amount of fast food in the world. Saw that the other day. And yet is one of the healthiest. You know why? Because their fast food portions are like the kids' meal. Honestly, our kids' meals are probably larger. This is a big problem. But good. Very nice. Thank you for sharing that. That was a pretty good one there. On the fly. Look at you. Coming in there on the fly. So,
well, I think with that, we'll call it here. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope this was informative. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let us know what you think. Follow us on Instagram at ReunitedStatesPod. Let us know what you want to hear next. And with that, from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Eric.
And from Manchester, New Hampshire, my name is Jesse Saywell.
And this has been Reunited States.
When the whole world has got you down, and there's no one else around, turn that crown right upside down and turn on the power. Oh, Reunited States. Reunited States. Civil discourse, ain't it great? Tyler and Jesse, oh, they can't.